Welcome to One Planet Conservation Awareness, and today we're going to be talking about World Fisheries Day. We're lucky enough to be joined by two professors who are some of the biggest names in marine conservation, one of my old lecturers and quite frankly an inspiration for my conservation career, Professor Jason Hall-Spencer, and the godfather of global fisheries research, Professor Daniel Pauly. So, Daniel, could you start us off by giving a quick introduction to yourself and just let us know what the term fisheries means? So, when we're talking about fisheries, what do we mean?
So, introducing myself, I'm a professor of fisheries at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And I have been here more than 20 years. But before, I have been based in the Philippines, from where I covered really the fisheries of the entire world, especially of the tropics, for which I studied and gave courses, and so I have a good overview over the fisheries of the world. What are fisheries? Actually, this is the site of interaction between a gear handled by humans and fish or other aquatic animals. Then, so if you study only the fish, you do ichthyology or zoology. If you study only the fishes, you do sociology or economics. But where they interact, where this resource, this fish become a resource and are acted upon by the gear, killed or captured, that is fishing. And this interaction has obviously taken place thousands of years, 100,000 of years. We have fished even before we went out of Africa, modern humans. But and it is there's archaeological remain demonstrating that. But really, fishing became different in Britain, around Britain, in the 1880s, when the first fossil fuel-driven trawlers were launched, the steam trawlers, because they introduce a completely new dimension into fishing. Fishing before used the energy that is accumulated only during a year in the form of wind, the energy of that we get from the sun, but that is current energy and the energy that is in rowing boats. With the use of fossil energy, we launch ourselves we used fossil energy accumulated over millions of years in coal and later petrol and diesel fuel and so on. So we could apply a huge amount of energy to a local place. And this local place was a bay or a gulf or an embayment around Britain. And they were emptied. Within 10 years, you couldn't fish anymore, these trawlers, and they had to go to the open North Sea. And they had to then expand to the North Atlantic. And what we experience now is these boats and the descendant have finished the conquest of the world. There's no more space where they can expand, and hence fisheries and fish catches have begun to decline. And they have begun to decline in 1900, in the mid 90s, but because this expansion, which fossil fuel and subsidy-driven expansion is over. They have reached the end of the world.
So, as people used to think that they can just sail off the end of the world, what you're saying is that humans have managed to go to every corner of the ocean, and there's not really anywhere left to explore. But it's not just the fact that people can, go anywhere they want to now. It's also the progression of all this equipment. And Jason, I think I remember you actually teaching me this at university. Could you give a quick introduction to yourself and just talk us about the different techniques when we're talking about industrial fishing? I'm sure everyone knows about, your bog standard fishing rod. but what are some of the big fishing techniques that are having this impact on global fisheries, and why are they so damaging, some of these techniques?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm Jason Hall Spencer, and I'm a professor of marine biology at the University of Plymouth, which is also my hometown. So I've grown up in a place that does a lot of fishing. And I've actually personally spent a lot of time on fishing boats as well, because one of my first jobs was to film different types of fishing gear in use all around the European Union. So it was really, really interesting. And the fishermen were really interested too, because they could see for the first time how their gear was working on the seabed. And they were glued to the video because they always want to tinker and make it better, more efficient, probably to use less fuel and catch more fish, basically. But in the course of that job, it became very clear to me that some types of fishing are fairly benign, some types of gear are fairly benign in terms of the damage they do, whereas others are really insanely damaging. So the big example that I'm aware of in European waters is the use of scallop dredges, because they've got teeth that are about 10 centimeters long, 10 centimeters apart. They penetrate into the seabed and are dragged heavily through it. And all that can really survive that are the very, very tough-shelled organisms like small scallops. Now, unfortunately, that gives fishermen the impression that what they're doing is sustainable, because they can go back to an area 7 years later, and those small scallops that pass through the gear grow up to be big scallops, and you can catch them again. But the damage that's done to everything else that lives there that's not got a hard shell is incredible. So sponges, corals, all the other delicate marine life is smashed to smithereens. And basically anything that's heavily dragged across the seafloor will cause damage to long-lived organisms, to the extent that, as Daniel was saying, when steam power first came in the North Sea, the seabed was ripped clear of fossil trees that were there in abundance, because of course the North Sea was a land bridge between Europe and the UK back in the day. But all of that structure has been ripped away, and now the North Sea, the bottom of it, looks like a ploughed field. It's pretty featureless, really. In some places you can go where the gear hasn't affected the seabed, and you can see deep sea coral reefs, for example, or delicate sponge reefs made of silica like glass, and those are an indication of what the seabed used to look like before this heavy gear was used. Now, on the flip side, there are other types of gear that you can catch organisms profitably with, like pots. So people used to use traps for fish. They still do in places like the Philippines. And we need to go back. We need to go back to these more benign ways of capturing protein from the sea, because we just simply can't catch any more fish as it is at the moment, because we're abusing the marine environment. But if we took the pressure off, if we took the boot off the neck of the fisheries, we could catch more fish, because more habitats would be looked after and the fish would grow bigger and breed better.
I think that's something that we're seeing a lot of encouragement with when we look at no-take zones around the world, and a lot of research is going on to see no-take zones. And Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about the impact no-take zones can have, and how the marine protected areas can help, not just the fish and the ecology of that area, but the widespread, the biomes that they might affect?
Essentially, in the marine world, as everywhere else, animals try to distance themselves from the other, the conspecific, because the density dependence affect the feeding success and so on. So essentially, if the biomass, if the amount of fish in a marine protected area increase because it is protected, the animals will end up spilling over. They will spilling over, and this spillover effect can be used by the fisheries that operate at the edge of, that will operate then at the edge of this marine reserve. And this is, it sounds like theoretical, and when you don't have a marine protected area in place, the scientists have difficulties getting the message across that that this benefits will benefit the fishery. And in fact, there is the fishers in most regions of the world oppose marine protected area because they do not believe that. But everywhere it has been possible to create marine protected area, they end up fishing, that is known as fishing the line. They end up concentrating the fishers at the border of this marine protected area, and thus proving the point. In fact, you can see that if there is a website called the Global Fishing Watch, where the satellite communication of boats is monitored, and you can see them around large marine protected area. For example, in a country called Kiribati in the Pacific, you can see them around this huge square of sea space, fishing at the edge. Also, Chinese vessels now fishing around the Galapagos. They because the Chinese government has issued a decree that they have to stay 5 miles away from the exclusive economic zone, which is also the limit of the marine protected area. You can see them 5 miles along the marine protected area, fishing the line. Even in Florida, where the objection of fishers have totally prevented any marine protected area. The angler community that they are very powerful. There is Cape Canaveral, the launching pad for rockets, US rockets, at least was, has created a marine protected area. And again, this is the only place where in Florida you can catch trophy fish at the edge of the marine protected area. So the fisherman community is completely useless in evaluating what the benefit of marine protected area, and they will be converted only when they can see them with their own eyes. However, they prevent their creation. And the only area of the world where marine protected areas have become accepted by a vast swath of fishers is the Caribbean. A colleague from Britain, Callum Roberts, has worked in St. Lucia and other places and has huge success. Also the Polynesian, in many parts of Polynesia, for example, in what is now French Polynesia, they are tradition, Rawi, of creating marine protected areas. They were part of the reef, were protected under the authority of a chief. And this may have changed after a few years. They protected another area, and this enabled the maintenance of an enormous level of productivity, as documented for Hawaii, where also before the Polynesian rule over Hawaii was replaced by American rule. So this marine protected area work. However, they have to be protected. And in Europe, the network of marine protected area are essentially killing zones where this is true. This is not an exaggeration. Where the biomass of fish is less, especially sharks and other big fish, is less than outside the protected area, because there is more fishing effort inside this marine protected area than outside. This is outrageous. This is a scandal because they have been declared and nobody has cared about implementing rules, and they are paper parks.
So the idea of marine protected areas is not a new one. It's just coming from, tribal history, and, it works. So now we just have to implement it. And it's quite obvious for people to understand why places like the Galapagos, Komodo, you might want to protect those areas, because if you go diving, obviously there's beautiful coral reefs. But Jason, could you tell us a little bit more about the marine protected areas in the UK, and what is special? Why would we want to protect the UK waters? And with your research, do you see any hope with the fisheries around the UK's coast?
Well, yeah, hope mixed with a fair amount of despondency, because, for example, we've got some marine protected areas that at the moment are open to Dutch fleets that are fitted with gear that's electric. So it shocks the seabed. And the idea, the way it's sold, is it's to reduce the carbon footprint of the fishery. In order to lighten the gear, you send out a shock to stun the fish on the seabed. Of course, it stuns other organisms too. And this is carrying on in marine protected areas, which to me is completely outrageous. So what's essential is that protected areas are just that, exactly that. You can't hunt or kill wildlife in them, including the fish. That's the point of a protected area as far as I'm concerned. Some of them are, some of the best protected areas are not called marine protected areas at all, because that's like a red rag to the fishing industry. But in some cases, when working with the fishing industry, we've been able to put some areas off limits to towed demersal gear. And we don't call them marine protected areas. We call them things like fisheries regeneration areas, or places that it's dangerous to fish because you can rip your gear open. And that's working. So there's deep sea coral reefs off the UK. Most people don't know about this, but we've got fantastic coral reefs in the deep sea, off Scotland, for example. And the fishermen themselves designed protected areas so that they couldn't go into those areas with towed gear. And they still can't today. We know it's working because satellite data shows us these are properly protected areas of the seabed. And that means those deep sea coral reefs provide areas for the feeding and the breeding of commercially important species of fish, like cod. So there are examples where it can work, and there are examples where it's really not working at all. And it's the latter, obviously, that we need to focus on. And I think by learning from places where it works internationally, that's going to be the way forwards. And in my humble opinion, it works best when the industry is involved with the design and the objectives of the protected area.
So rather than fighting against all these fishing fleets, they should be working with them to find essentially a compromise, and using the knowledge from both the protection agencies and the fisheries themselves to find out what works best, and making them think not only of fishing today, but also to fish tomorrow as well, I would say.
That's right. The trouble is, fishermen are in competition with each other over a limited resource. And so often, if they think a marine protected area isn't being properly protected, and that somebody else is going in there and catching fish that should be growing up to breed, they hate that. Who wouldn't, right? And so that breaks down the ability to properly manage those closed areas. But if they know that everybody's in it together and they'll benefit together from proper protection, they start shopping each other and policing each other to stop illegal fishing. And that works quite well. And where you're able to show fishermen, for example, this is the very spot that your livelihood depends on, because this is where the fish are breeding, this is where they're laying the eggs on the seabed, this is where your future is going to be coming from, then that makes sense to them. If you say there's a rare anemone that lives on this piece of seabed, they don't give a monkeys, because they're not getting money out of a rare anemone. But by protecting places where fish breed, you can also be protecting many other features of the seabed and the food web that are important. And people have made calculations that you need to protect basically about 30% of the seas around us in order to get the best benefit in terms of wildlife conservation and also fisheries for people to eat.
So much like everything with conservation, it's about mixing the science with the industry and making it work for both. So that's really interesting to hear about how that's working in the UK. And talking about hope, Daniel, can you very quickly just run us through how people at home, whether they live near the coast or not, how can they change their life to relieve the pressure on our world's fisheries?
Well, my answer is going to be disappointing, because I don't think it is a matter of individual citizens to regulate fisheries. I think this is like the suppression of criminality. We should not be commit crimes, but it's not our business to apprehend thieves and murderers. This is the role of the police, and we delegate this job for good reason. vigilantes, for example, cannot do justice. And similarly, it is unfair. It's not only unrealistic, but also unfair to ask people who have worked 8 hours in a shop selling things or in a factory to then decide to have to when purchasing food in a shop, to have to decide whether the stock is well managed or not, and choose accordingly. When I buy a TV, I don't have to ensure that it is not uh, made by slaves, by enslaved people. That for that we have authorities, and also it is when I buy things, I don't have to ensure that it is not stolen, that it is that the shop is not a fence. We have for this, we have the police, and the notion has come that I hear in your question that for fish, we should be the consumers should be the one regulating the fishery through the purchase, and I think this is an aberration, and I think this is giving up on the government that has a job, which is to ensure that the fisheries are well managed, and as the same way we expect our government to keep our streets safe, and I think that the discussion has to move back to where it should be. It is the job of the government, of a competent government, to make a competent fishing policy. It's not the job of people who have worked 8 hours a day at a job to then run the fishery by choosing products that are supposed to be well from fisheries that are well managed. Because also, and that's my other thing, the claims that the stuff that has certain logos on them is sustainably caught is largely PR and BS at the same time.
So really, we should be putting pressure onto our governments to really make a difference.
Yes, sir.
Jason, have you got anything you'd like to add to what says there?
One of the most bruising chapters of my career was working for the Marine Stewardship Council when they wanted to certify that the Atlantic scallop that's caught in the US was done so sustainably. And the way you catch it is using this very heavy gear that causes long-term damage to the seabed. So I fought long and hard, but there was a bank of lawyers up against me, really, that eventually I just got tired and couldn't carry on fighting as an individual against this greenwash label that was going to get put onto this this product. And so now Walmart and the customers that go to Walmart think with an open heart that they're buying something that's sustainable and well managed because it's got this logo on it. But this is this famous greenwashing problem. Yep. And so I'm fully behind what Daniel said, that we can't rely on customers to manage these fisheries, because who knows what type of tuna is dolphin friendly or not dolphin friendly, or what dolphin friendly means anyway. What's needed is the competent authorities to manage these things properly.
And for anybody that wants to find out more about this, specifically in the UK, Jason, is there any way you could direct them to find out more information on sustainable fisheries and what's going on with the UK's protected areas?
Well, the Marine Conservation Society has always been very hot on fisheries. It does advocate the idea that you can choose personally what types of fish you eat based on their sustainability, and some of that is very accurate. So, for example, monkfish that live on the seabed that taste really good, actually the way you catch them is quite damaging to the marine environment, whereas a mackerel swimming in the water column can be caught in a way that's not damaging, and there's lots of mackerel. So there are choices that can be made, well-informed choices about what you eat. So I would go to the Marine Conservation Society.
And Daniel, would you direct anybody who's listening from outside of the UK of where they can go to find out more, either about your work or to find out more information about what we've been talking about today?
I think the various NGOs maybe Greenpeace or and others give better advice in the meantime than the Marine Stewardship Council. But the question you pose is more difficult, because then I would have to be able to rattle down the best place to go. And Jason has indicated where in Britain, the Marine Conservation Society, the equivalent of the Marine Conservation Society in other countries is the place to go. For example, in my province in Canada, the David Suzuki Foundation is a reliable partner and a reliable source of information about the fisheries of British Columbia. But I wouldn't know what the best source of information is in Quebec or in New England or in California.
But would you suggest that if for people who are trying to live a more sustainable livelihood, rather than just going into the supermarket and looking for those labels of, you know,
I think they should vote for candidates that are explicitly pushing for better environmental protection. I think that voting is actually the more relevant activity. The participating in our democracy and making sure that people are elected who view government as a positive thing that we have to reinforce, and not people who see government as an annoyance that we should work around, which is what the Marine Stewardship Council actually does.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, I think that's very good advice on anybody trying to be sustainable with anything, really, not just fisheries, whether they're concerned about, you know, the fishing industry, deforestation. You can use your voting power to vote for those who are fighting for our biodiversity.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that covers pretty much everything we wanted to so far. I'm sure both of you could talk about the marine world and fisheries for days and days. But this has just been a quick snapshot into what you need to know. And if you want to find out more information, you can follow those suggestions from Daniel and Jason. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. And
bye.
We wish you good luck with your future research. And for those at home, make sure for the rest of National Fisheries Day, you look up and find out as much information as you can.
Bye.
Bye, Jason. Guys. Bye.